An elderly black woman arrived at the airport expecting nothing more than a quiet flight. Dressed with quiet elegance and carrying herself with unmistakable dignity, she stepped toward the first-class gate, only to be stopped by a flight attendant who decided, with a single glance, that she didn't belong. In front of curious strangers, she was judged, humiliated, and dismissed because of the color of her skin. But what no one in that terminal could have imagined was that this painful moment would trigger a chain of events that would leave an entire airline stunned. Was this just another act of prejudice, or the beginning of a lesson no one aboard that flight would ever forget? For nearly 4 decades, Eleanor Brooks had built a life defined by quiet excellence. She had started with almost nothing, working long days, making difficult choices, and refusing to let every closed door become the end of her journey. While others chased attention, she focused on earning respect through discipline, generosity, and unwavering determination. Few people knew that behind her calm smile stood a woman whose business decisions had transformed struggling companies into thriving success stories. That morning, she was traveling to attend an important meeting that could shape the future of another investment. Wanting nothing more than a peaceful flight, she arrived at the airport early, carrying only a small leather suitcase and the confidence that comes from a lifetime of overcoming obstacles. She greeted airport staff with kindness, waited patiently through security, and walked toward the first-class gate without seeking anyone's approval. To everyone around her, she appeared to be just another elderly traveler beginning an ordinary trip. But appearances have a way of inviting dangerous assumptions. As boarding began, curious eyes followed Eleanor for reasons she couldn't yet understand. A few whispers drifted through the waiting area, and subtle glances lingered a little longer than they should have. She ignored them, believing that respect and courtesy would speak louder than prejudice. She had no idea that within the next few moments, one stranger's snap judgment would turn a routine flight into a public humiliation. Even more unbelievable, that single act of discrimination would set in motion a story powerful enough to shake an entire airline and force everyone involved to confront a truth they never expected. As the boarding announcement echoed through the terminal, passengers formed an orderly line outside the aircraft. Eleanor picked up her small suitcase, showed her boarding pass with a gentle smile, and stepped forward. Everything about the moment felt routine, until the flight attendant's expression suddenly changed. Her eyes moved from the boarding pass to Eleanor's face, then back again. Instead of welcoming her aboard, she blocked the entrance with a forced smile that quickly hardened into suspicion. Without asking a single respectful question, she quietly suggested that there must be some mistake. First-class passengers, she implied, rarely looked like Eleanor. A few nearby travelers exchanged awkward glances. Some looked away, unwilling to get involved. Others watched with open curiosity, as if waiting for a spectacle. Eleanor calmly presented her identification and confirmed that the ticket had been purchased weeks earlier. She expected the misunderstanding to end there. It didn't. The flight attendant insisted on checking the reservation again and again, even after every detail matched perfectly. Her voice grew louder with every passing second, making sure everyone in the boarding area could hear. What began as an unnecessary delay quickly turned into a public interrogation. The quiet dignity Eleanor had carried into the airport was now being tested in front of dozens of strangers. Then came the moment that silenced the terminal. The attendant suggested that perhaps Eleanor had wandered into the wrong boarding lane and pointed toward economy class. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. Someone shook their head in disbelief, while another passenger secretly reached for a phone, sensing something deeply wrong was unfolding. Eleanor didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply held out her boarding pass once more, allowing the facts to speak for themselves. Yet facts no longer mattered. The attendant called over a supervisor, describing the situation as though Eleanor were attempting to deceive the airline. Within moments, airport staff surrounded the boarding gate. Every passing traveler slowed down to watch. Some whispered. Others stared openly. No one knew Eleanor's story, but many had already formed opinions based on appearances alone. The supervisor scanned the ticket and immediately confirmed that everything was valid. For one brief moment, it seemed the nightmare was finally over. Instead of apologizing, however, the flight attendant doubled down. She insisted that company policy required additional verification, though no such policy existed. Her pride had become more important than the truth. Every unnecessary minute deepened the humiliation, turning a simple boarding process into a painful display of prejudice. Eleanor remained remarkably composed, but inside, every second carried the weight of memories she had spent a lifetime overcoming. This wasn't the first time someone had underestimated her because she was an elderly Black woman. It was simply the latest reminder that success could not always shield someone from ignorance. Eventually, after several uncomfortable minutes, the supervisor quietly stepped aside and allowed Eleanor to board. No apology, no acknowledgement, just silence, as though nothing unusual had happened. As she walked through the aircraft, passengers watched her with expressions ranging from sympathy to embarrassment. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed of what they had witnessed, but unwilling to speak. Others wondered who this woman really was and why she had remained so calm through such obvious injustice. Eleanor settled into her first-class seat, folded her hands, and looked out the window. To everyone else, the incident appeared to be over. But for Eleanor, it had only just begun. Because while the flight attendant believed she had embarrassed an ordinary passenger, she had unknowingly humiliated a woman with the power to change the future of the entire airline. And before this journey was over, every decision made at that boarding gate would come back in a way no one could have imagined. The flight landed, but the weight of what had happened never left the cabin. As passengers gathered their belongings, several quietly approached Eleanor. Some apologized for staying silent. Others admitted they had never witnessed discrimination so openly. One passenger even revealed that the entire incident had been recorded on a cell phone and was already spreading across social media. Within hours, thousands of people were asking the same question: how could an airline allow a paying first-class passenger to be treated with such disrespect? The airline's executives reacted quickly. Public statements were drafted. Damage control meetings were called. The flight attendant insisted she had only been following procedure, while supervisors struggled to explain why no one had stopped the humiliation before it escalated. Every explanation sounded weaker than the last. Then came the meeting no one expected. Several days later, the airline's board gathered to discuss the growing public backlash. They expected lawyers, consultants, and public relations experts. Instead, the conference room doors opened, and Eleanor walked in. The room fell silent. The same woman who had been publicly questioned at the boarding gate now stood before the executives, with complete confidence. There was no anger in her voice, no desire for revenge, only a calm presence that demanded attention. Then the chairman made an announcement that left every executive speechless. After months of confidential negotiations that had begun long before the airport incident, Eleanor's investment group had completed the purchase of a controlling ownership stake in the struggling airline. In a single moment, the balance of power shifted. The flight attendant who believed Eleanor didn't belong in first class had unknowingly insulted one of the airline's future owners. But Eleanor made it clear that this wasn't about personal revenge. If the company had treated her this way, a successful businesswoman with every resource available, how many ordinary travelers had endured the same humiliation with no one to defend them? The room was consumed by silence, because everyone suddenly understood that the biggest consequence wasn't who Eleanor had become. It was the truth her experience had exposed about the airline itself. The days that followed marked the beginning of a new chapter, not only for Eleanor, but for the airline itself. Her first decision as a controlling owner was not to seek revenge or publicly shame those responsible. Instead, she demanded accountability. An independent investigation uncovered a pattern of complaints that had been ignored for years. Employees received mandatory training on bias and respectful customer service, reporting systems were strengthened, and clear policies were introduced to ensure that no passenger would ever again be judged by appearance before being treated with dignity. The flight attendant who had humiliated Eleanor faced the consequences of her actions. But Eleanor never celebrated that outcome. She understood that removing one person could never erase a problem rooted in prejudice. Real change required courage, honesty, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. For Eleanor, the painful memory of standing at that boarding gate would never completely disappear. The humiliation, the silent stares, and the feeling of being told she did not belong became scars she carried with quiet strength. Yet instead of allowing that moment to define her, she transformed it into an opportunity to protect countless others from experiencing the same injustice. Her story quickly spread far beyond the airline. It became a reminder that racism is not always loud. Sometimes it hides behind assumptions, polite smiles, and decisions made in a matter of seconds. And those moments can leave wounds that last a lifetime. The greatest lesson was never that Eleanor became an owner. It was that no amount of wealth, success, or accomplishment should be required for someone to be treated with basic human dignity and respect. The next time you see someone being judged before they're even heard, what will you do? Will you look away like so many did that day? Or will you be the one who chooses courage over silence? Because history doesn't change when injustice happens. It changes when ordinary people refuse to let it continue.